computer. There we go. All right, everybody, welcome to AgUncensored number 27. Today, I've got a really cool guy. I've followed him on Twitter for a long time, spoke with him on there, and tonight we're going to sit down and go through some stuff. It's Joe Basset. Now, if you don't know who Joe is, he is the CEO at Dawn Equipment, and Dawn is one of those remarkable companies that just make stuff in my mind that you're like, how does that even work? Because it's just amazing. And he's a super cool guy, at least what I've followed him on Twitter, and I wanted to get him on here and get to know him a little better. And so here we are. Joe, do you want to tell people how you got to where you're at, or maybe just even who you are?
I am 38 years old. Live here in Northern Illinois, a small town called Sycamore, which is west of Chicago, about 1 hour. From a career standpoint, let's see, Dawn Equipment was originally founded by my father and a couple other guys in the early 90s. And the company it's always been a really innovative company. You know, we kind of came on, it was originally a ridge till company. It was kind of like the tail end of the ridge till era there in the early 90s. And I remember the first Dawn product was actually this thing called the T-knife. And it was this kind of knife that you'd run in between two rows of ridge till corn, and it would shoot ammonia out under each row. And then, you know, through this kind of a bunch of other things, they actually made one of the first yield monitors on the market, if not the first. There's some dispute about that subject. My father's partner, this guy, Steve Favor, was an early kind of innovator in precision farming and stuff like that. Long story on that. Then they started making the tooth wheel row cleaners, which was, you know, Roundup had just come around, and all of a sudden, like, whoa, farming, and it was super easy. And, you know, you can just, no-till became really easy to do in a way that it wasn't before. And so the company grew really fast, making the kind of tooth wheel row cleaner. We always made a really heavy duty, high quality product there, grew super fast. Then my father kind of looked at all the other planters that were on the market, and he's like, you know, these are kind of this is junk. We're going to make something way better. And he started making this really innovative, way ahead of its time planter called the Paradigm 9000 planter that we made, you know, 5 or 6 units of. It would still be a really innovative planter today. It had central fill fertilizer, central fill seed, could plant at 10 miles an hour. It had hydraulic down pressure back in the mid 90s. You know, basically just kind of like, at that time we were outsourcing a lot of the stuff we did, and kind of ran out of runway. And, you know, went through Chapter 11 here in like the late 90s when I was in college, and shrunk all the way down to just, you know, 3 or 4 employees. But they always had this kind of core group of planter attachments, really high quality products that sold, and he kind of stuck with it. Most companies just fold in that situation, stuck with it. And I went to the University of Iowa. I studied physics at the University of Iowa. I actually I kind of learned a trade as a machinist at the Department of Physics at the University of Iowa, which was a really great thing for me. Got involved with computer science and stuff like that. Kind of got to the end of that, and it was like, well, am I going to go into, there was a fork in the road where I was either going to go into one pathway, which was in computer science and in parallel, you know, computing and hard science, or I was going to go back and get into it. And I've always been, I love mechanical stuff. I've always had a very strong pull towards mechanical things that is just I can't even understand. And I started modeling in 3D CAD in the late 90s also. And I just decided, hey, you know, it's got to be a good starting point and help the family out. And it's a good opportunity, even if you have a company with a few employees and just a small number of sales, it's at least some starting point. And we just took it from there. And, you know, thankfully my father just sort of let me go along with some really harebrained ideas in the early days, which were, man, every day I wish I could have the first 10 years of my career back, because just the mistakes after mistakes after mistakes, you know, that you make early in your career. And a couple things you just try a bunch of different things, and eventually some stuff starts clicking, and then you do the stuff that works and you don't do the stuff that doesn't work. And it comes to today where we're a much larger organization. We're at about 50 employees, and we make a range of products which are, at this point, it's not even totally clear that we could be making hydraulic components for all sorts of industries. Whereas it's kind of an unusual company, actually, because we do some of the things we do are things that most companies would actually outsource. Um, in terms of we actually make the metal. If you go to some other companies that would be in our market space and you go to their facilities, they would be doing design, but you walk into their shop and it might look more like a warehouse. The difference at Dawn Equipment is that we're actually making the hardware. We're taking raw steel and making a large percentage of the components that we make. And a lot of the product is made, within a 100-mile radius of Chicago, Illinois. So it's an almost 100% American-made product too.
So you basically have taken this from like where it was planer attachments, and now you branched out and are doing all this. And with what I'm hearing is, as you're building this stuff, you're basically doing it. You probably even have to get into like what kind of alloys you're putting in this so you can work with it, and like the level of detail. That's something I've always been impressed with is, I mean, you're not joking when you say like you go down to the last little piece and you're putting it together and building it
Oh yeah.
from the ground up. I mean, that's something that's, you don't, I mean, rather than just being like let's grab this part A, B, and C and bolt them together. You guys are literally, you're building it and then figuring out how to mass produce it, as I see it. And I may be wrong. Is that what you do?
Right. So most people would say, I need a hydraulic cylinder, so I'm going to just buy a hydraulic cylinder. Well, because when you look at some of the products we're making for the planters now, they don't, you don't go to a store and find a hydraulic product of this. It's all kind of custom made, like every single component, and we'll make components with hundreds of dimensions that we control within a thousandth of an inch. So there's not only is there this huge uphill learning curve in terms of how to run a business, how to what do the customers want, how to design products that do what we want them to do. But then we have this secondary kind of pathway of learning that we have to do in terms of how do we actually make it? How do we manufacture it? Because, a lot of people in the industry have, if you look from the sort of late 90s to 2000 era, it was the era of outsourcing. We'll design it, we'll have somebody else make it that can make it cheaper, whatever. But I really believe that bringing manufacturing back in-house is actually the way to execute a product strategy and to innovate, because we can iterate so much faster when we're actually making the product. And there's so much less friction by just being able to have an idea, test it, make it, prototype it, like doing all of those things under one building, rather than, it's like if you're in an outsourced business model, you make a design, then you find somebody to make a prototype and it costs a fortune, then you test it. And one thing my father said that's just absolutely true is everything needs to be designed 4 times. There's no product at least 4 times.
At least 4.
Every product needs to be designed 4 times. So you design it, it kind of works. You're always looking for that sign. A product that's going to work usually gives you a sign that it's going to work. If it doesn't give you any sign, you're usually better off cutting your losses. But a product that has potential, it gives you a sign, and then you design it. And the problem with farming, though, it's not like making it's not like making a car or an airplane, where a car or an airplane has a very sort of structured set of constraints. The air and the road are, and the relatively the same. But for farming, there's all of these different soil types and conditions, like every which way that we're going to go with. I mean, if I sell you a product down in Western Oklahoma, the kind of things that you're going to get into, where, especially you said you're growing dryland corn out there where it's so dry,
Yeah.
the stalks will just like get petrified out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll have these petrified stalks that never break down. and then they want to get wedged up in equipment, and or every single different which way. It's really hard. So one of the things, you can test, and we now operate a full-time test facility, a field test facility by our factory, which is invaluable just to be able to run things in the ground all the time. But until you really deploy something on the large scale across the country, you don't really know what you have.
Yeah.
And for a small mid-sized company like us, we don't have the capacity to operate nationwide product validation programs like the big manufacturers do. So, we really live with the, we do have to almost have our customers helping us with product validation sometimes, and customer ideas will actually feed back into the product too. That's, your customers are like, it's like they're like the race driver, and I'm like the race engineer, right? And like the driver is going to give you feedback on how it's handling, so you know how to set the car up, and that you got to really efficiently bring that feedback back into the product too.
Yeah. Well, and part of, like you were talking about, your creative process of when you do it in-house, I mean, you are, and that's so cool, because whenever you're building something, even if you're in your shop tinkering around and you do it, go out and you play around with it, and you see, oh, this little piece needs to be over here. I mean, small things that part of that creative process. And I kind of went through this when strip till first came in our area. Nobody really built strip till rigs. I mean, they did, but I went out and you'd find other companies that were built for, like you say, the Midwest, or ones that were built for here. And you kind of had to Frankenstein something together. And after you ran it for a year, you were like, I wish I could put this attachment on here. And, as a farmer, all I could do was buy and retrofit. But like where you're actually going out and doing that, I think that, like you said, that gives you an edge where you could actually, it's almost so basic. It's amazing that people don't do it, because it's just the simple common sense idea of trial and error. I mean, that's how most things should be built. Find out what doesn't work so you don't ship it out and then be like, well, this is a pile of crap.
See, normally with an outsourced business model, that's, you have to be really light on your feet from a manufacturing standpoint, because if you're constantly, one of our key fundamental guiding principles is continuous improvement, that we're always going to keep trying to improve the product all the time. And that's, changing the product gets really expensive. And so you'll see a lot of products on the market that just simply get to a point where it just is what it is, and companies just kind of cease to improve them at some point. Whereas the really good companies are the companies that are trying to improve over time.
And this brings up a question on my end from a farmer's perspective, because I know I struggle with this, and I think a lot of people do. Whenever you see like these advances, and I'll just, for example, like the hydraulics on a planter, the down pressure, all this, and when it first came out, it was like airbags. Then we moved to hydraulics, and you see this pace of change, and you're watching all this happen. And as a producer, a guy who's got to buy this equipment, I'm left sitting here thinking, well, I've seen the improvement we've made in the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever that number is. Do I buy now, and then 2 years from now regret not having the next thing that comes along? Like, you're almost paralyzed after a point, because what's the next thing coming down that you might miss by actually buying now? And when you buy that, you're making a substantial, like, a lot of times for a guy like me, a planter is a 10-year purchase. So, I'm buying it now. That's got to ride me till the next wave of innovation. And am I going to be left behind by the industry? I mean, probably not. But just as a human, no one wants to buy something to have the next best thing come out in the 2 years down the road. So how do you, as a producer, like as a man who manufactures this, how do you kind of address that to the producer who's buying on that curve?
Well, when you look at a couple of different things, I mean, when you look at our next generation planter hydraulic systems, we came out with a product 2 years ago that we, ran with maybe 2 or 3 in the reflex actuation system, 2 or 3 customers. Last year we run with 20 or 30 people, and then this year we come in and make a dramatic design change, which is like basically where the product is going to reach maturity, not only from a performance standpoint, a reliability standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint as a business model. Well, if we look at those customers that the early adopters, those 20 to 30 people that went out and bought our product last year and the year before, those are our those are our key customers, because they're willing to go out and be early on the adoption curve. And if we come out and now take effectively a product that is in the same category doing the exact same thing and come out with a vastly improved product, we're just giving them a big kick in the balls. So what
yes, I'm glad you said that, because that's how it feels on our end. Is like,
that's why we'll do a PIP, and we know, because those customers having those customers out across the country running the product is immensely valuable in terms of us really understanding what we're doing, because we're also learning. And that's why we're going to be, we'll do a product improvement program and effectively update every single one of them. Does it cost a lot of money? It does cost a lot of money, but long term it's the only sensible decision to make, because those you have to protect those customers that are willing to buy your product early on.
You bet. Well, that's your research and development, and it probably is less expensive than having all that, the trials on multiple deals. You're putting it out in the real world. Let's figure what's going on, and that kind of brings me to as we're talking about what happens going down in the future. Let's just speculate here on the future of agriculture and not just specifically like with planter units or anything, but and this is where you're not afraid to dive into some of these far-reaching questions of like, where do you see this as far as like autonomous equipment and the connectivity, whether it be through the internet, through wireless, or how do you see our industry in the next 10, 20 years? Are we going to keep adopting this technology, or have we kind of, like you said, leveled out where really you're at the most effective point you are right now?
So I actually have a complex sort of, both sides of my brain go in different directions, because on one side, we are right there with it. We're producing products that our new planter product range produces more data points per planted acre than any other product on the market. It allows you to automatically control how deep you're planting and monitor the seed depth or change the seed depth in real time. It automates the performance of the closing wheels. It's remarkable. We're bringing in a telematics product for the first time. And so we have in our current product line that you can buy from us products that effectively, unless something breaks, you don't have to ever touch your planter rug unit.
That's pretty amazing.
So it'll be completely either automatic or remote. So, and part of me says, okay, that's the default status quo industry, expectation is that ag is going to continue to go one direction, increasing levels of automation, and the kind of default status quo opinion that we're going to move towards small autonomous vehicles and blah, 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 and drones and data, blah, 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 blah. And it's fine, great. But I've got this little voice in my head that I'm very open about, that whole, we're not serving you, right? Mm-hmm. When technologists and engineers get into agriculture, and you have a lot of people coming into the industry from outside of ag, from consumer technology, from other things, right? It's about selling more stuff, right? It's a vision of the future that results in more stuff to sell. And part of me believes that there is, if we really sit back and think, okay, who are we serving? Are you, Joe Farmer, are you making any more money than you made 10 years ago? Or really, other than, it's not. Look at the situation. We're just treading water, right?
Amen. I'm right there with you, because it's like you keep getting the next step, but all we're doing, it's like you're on a treadmill. You're just running in place. And to get to
grow more corn, fine, we'll grow more corn. Okay, who are we serving? We might be feeding more people more cheap food. So I had these guys over, some of my customers from Ukraine who came over to the United States for the first time, And we went out, and the first night they're like, we got to go out for steaks. So I go out and we get these nice porterhouses, and they're like, man, I've never seen anybody cut the meat off a bone like these guys from Ukraine. And they're like, oh, it's amazing. Then we come out for have burgers yesterday. And these guys are like, man, that is the best tasting burger I've ever had. Because European meat, it's got a much more grass-fed taste, and they've never tasted meat that's been just as much fat and just fed the way American cows are fed. And they're like, but and tastes are changing. Yeah, it's great. Okay, we're feeding more stuff, but in the end, if you, the farmer, are my customer, we might be serving the broader consumers by providing low-cost food to more and more people. But if my customer is you, the farmer, am I serving you? And that's why the number one thing that pissed me off, and you know this too, is all of the ag tech startups that are like, we need to feed the world, blah, 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 billions of people by 2050, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, that's not your customer. Your customer is not the world of X number of billions of people you're feeding in 2050. Your customer is the farmer. How are you really materially changing the outcome for them, right? Are you really actually, is all this XYZ new widget really materially changing the outcome for the farmer? So I've become interested in ultra, and talk about disruptive businesses, ultra input cost reduced farming, where
Yes.
where
Yes.
the conversation's all about yield, right? And in my opinion, a lot of input suppliers, they want the conversation to all be about yield, because yield, it requires more and more, that incremental input. Oh, if you spray that fungicide, that XY2, and maybe you'll get this little gain out of it. It's that top, is it really worth this marginal yield? Whereas my hypothesis is that if we kind of close loop on profit maximization, then you're going to start looking at things a lot different. And I do think that we're on this verge. The place where software and tech and data is going to come in is when you're in fact doing real-time profitability mapping, right? And
Yes.
you're driving through the field and you're looking at your map is how much money did I make here? So your marketing is built into that software platform. Your as applied, maps are built into that platform. All of your costs, all of your amortization of your equipment, everything is built in. So as you drive across that field and you see that map, it's layering all of that stuff together, putting together one picture that says, what's the end result of how much money you're making? And I think that when that does happen, you're going to see people saying, oh, well, maybe it's not even worth farming these areas, right?
Yeah, well, and I can kind of do a little rudimentary example of that. I've been working on low population corn, and the idea that I have is, okay, plant 15,000 instead of 30, and the idea is that you only need one plant. Why not try to make that plant produce 2 ears instead of two plants producing one? The general sense is do more with less. It takes less fertilizer, less water. You better utilize the sunlight. And what I found, at least in my area, in the arid climate where water is my most living resource, if I get rain and I can kind of hack the system by using plants with more flex, I can take numbers that, take 12, 15,000 plants and make way more bushels per 1,000 seeds. Now, the trouble is the seed companies aren't really going along with this. Like you said, they're in the business of let's sell seed.
Somewhere,
But far enough down this line, you could find out where we could do more with less, because we could then take areas that weren't possible to farm and actually do things that we didn't believe possible. And it's kind of like what you're saying. I'm finding that the lower inputs on a larger scale, a lower input crop might actually is more profitable than going out trying to bang out 300 bushels and tap out my resource of the aquifer, but I'm doing it from a perspective of someone who's running out of resources. The majority of agriculture is done in areas that have adequate resources. So why are they going to change? So, I mean, I'm right there with you. And then I'm going to it from a mindset of how do we get better with what we have? And you're coming at it from how can we do more with less, but we're looking in the same direction. And I think there's not enough of us that are doing this, in my opinion.
Well, you tell me, if you look at the Oklahoma Panhandle, far western Kansas, eastern Colorado, what do you think agriculture looks like in 20 years in Western
low
Kansas.
water use crops. I mean, you're either going to find super drought resistant corn, or you're going to have more cotton. You're going to have these things that don't take near as much water. I mean, we've got great soils, great climate as far as being, you have some extreme heats and some extreme winter, but for the most part, with the high elevation, the low overnight temps, I mean, we can do a lot more with less. So, I mean, they'll still be farming, and maybe, if we don't adapt to that curve, we're going to be farming a lot different things out here. So
Is sorghum a big deal?
it is. I mean, the trouble with sorghum is just simply it's a numbers game. You look at being where I'm at 35, 40 cents a bushel basis under corn, and then you take the yield difference between what you can do with sorghum versus corn, and it doesn't pencil out. I mean, if you get China back into the game where they were going, buying hands over, we can produce pretty much anything that the market wants us to. It's just
Hmm.
you can't fight that and be like, I'm going to raise wheat or I'm going to raise sorghum because I'm that XYZ farmer. And you can, but everybody else is going to change and adapt, and then eventually you're going to be the one selling your stuff to them because they were willing to move forward.
Hmm.
They're willing to progress. Where stubborn isn't a bad quality, but it also can be a detrimental one.
I had thought that there would be some kind of macro trends in gluten-free products that would cause, you know, I've seen these gluten-free beers and gluten-free products that use sorghum instead of wheat. And, in a lot of the world, sorghum's going to be in Africa, other places. That's a major staple crop that you're using for beer production and all sorts of different things. But
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you look at just look at the future of agriculture, and you talk about 20 years from now. I mean, I asked the question: are the majority of farm products going to be raised in America? Or, I mean, I think there's been a willingness of American consumers to outsource everything else. Why wouldn't they outsource their food as soon as these other countries come online to a greater extent that they already have? I mean, you talk about your buddies from Ukraine. What does a tractor driver cost over there versus a tractor driver in the United States? I mean, what are their operating costs relative to ours?
nothing. 50 land that's like northern Iowa that you're renting for $50 an acre. The seed that Monsanto and DuPont are selling you, they'll sell them for $100 less a bag. You know, the it's it's totally different. It is, and it's a really strong market over there. And you look at the equipment that they buy, and it's like, whoa. I mean, how do these guys, when you look at the inflation and the instability in the region, how do these guys have the money to be buying this stuff? And it's because their costs are very low. It's very, very low cost. And that's what the whole thing, it's like you know, the seed companies are like, these guys aren't your friends, right? They're going to make every penny they possibly can. They'll, the fertilizer companies too. Um, and it's just, and getting back to the original point, it's like, okay, how do I serve my customers? Right. And how do I, and for me, it's also interesting. Like I know a lot of, people that farm in that sort of 200 to 500 acre range. And you have families that have been in agriculture for a long time that are effectively facing a future where, okay, you look at this autonomous future of agriculture. Do you need the 200 or 500 acre farmer growing biotech soybeans for his 200 acres? No, you don't. You don't need that, right? So, and then when you lose that client, then eventually, I mean, the number of people farming the land since this country was founded has been on like a exponential decline, and there's no reason to expect that it would be different, other than the fact that I believe there are consumer trends that are kind of pointing the other way. When consumers want to know the sort of provenance of the products that they're buying, that the growth in the organic market, and not only that, people are urban consumers are becoming more aware of just the intersection of sustainability and agriculture too, and being willing to pay for products that are produced in a certain way too. And I do believe that while it's a very, very small business, we're going to take a stab on making basically a suite of products under the Underground Agriculture brand, which is targeted to that smaller scale regenerative farm, to try and do effectively ultra input reduced agriculture. I'm even starting to realize there could be interesting products in the livestock space in terms of
Oh, yeah.
bringing,
Yeah.
you know,
Not only do we farm, we ranch, and yeah, there's livestock is to me one of those weird sectors that, for whatever reason, at least the cattle industry, it's kind of been left behind by everybody. I mean, you have the same ranching practices you have forever, but it's wide open for. I mean, you drop in some blockchain, you drop in some verification, you trace it. Hell, I've been pushing, drinking this 19 wines where the people are using AR to watch the people come alive on the label. Why couldn't you slap my picture, my family, and somebody opens up their steak or their hamburger, you hold your phone up there, boom, we're sitting there talking, telling, here's this animal when it was
yeah.
born. I mean, there's so many untapped avenues of communication in agriculture. It's absolutely mind blowing if you understand what could be.
Have you ever tried going direct to consumer?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that in the current setup of the industry, it's almost impossible because with the scaling that up and just utilizing all the animal, everybody wants a steak and everybody might want a hamburger, but who wants a roast? Who wants a brisket? Who wants
Right.
all the other parts? And then also in the major slaughterhouses, they can utilize every part of the carcass, the hooves, the hide. There's efficiencies that are gained with the commoditization of a product. And when you're in a small scale, yeah, you could jack it up and charge exorbitant amounts to make up that margin. But how are you then going to scale that?
Okay, so that's a great point. So my father raises like 50 cows up in Wisconsin, and he sells his beef at the local farmers market. And I've always told him, like, well, why don't you and he starts on grass and finishes on grain, but it's he's not adding any additional, it's natural, and but it's whether organic beef, what is it? But what people really, the consumers really care about is just knowing, like, okay, who is the person selling me this, knowing a little bit about the cow, blah blah blah. But so what you're saying is taking that 50 cow operation where you're basically selling freezer beef, where you're saying, okay, I'm not just going to give you a bunch of like steaks. You got to buy a little bit of everything.
Yeah, you got to buy the whole thing because that's
right?
What I have to sell.
And that you can't take that business model and scale it from 50 to 500 cows.
Well, I've got 500 cows right now.
Right.
It's the trouble is getting, okay, right now all these animals basically calve at the same time, and you kind of have to do that for the production cycle wise. But so then if you end up with relatively, let's just say 400 or 500 carcasses that all are going to mature relatively in the same, let's say 2 to 3 month time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have this many animals in it, even if you could find a regional packer to produce them, and now you've got 500 carcasses hanging in a warehouse. Now, how am I, as a farmer rancher in the Oklahoma Panhandle, how do I then take that carcass to consumers that realistically I'm going to have to sell nationwide? Like, how do you disperse that? And the current mechanism is already set up, but it's set up through very, very, very closely knit, organized, I hate to say cartel, but it's kind of like, there's so many, there's only a handful of packers and they handle, that whole game. So I'm not equipped or really even able to kind of dive into that with that scale.
So when you were talking about blockchain and traceability in terms of, or like putting some sort of scan that could basically connect you to that end buyer when you're in a national framework. So I'm not an expert on the beef industry by any means, and I don't really know much about packing, but so once the meat is frozen, what would that technology solution look like that would actually stay with the beef to its end user?
You could do it now with a QR code, barcode, any kind of a readable, scannable device. You could slap it on there now and ship it through the mainstream. But you also have to get these organizations that, I mean, as soon as you kind of prove that's a viable alternative and have a captive higher margin market, the minute that they kind of catch wind of that, you're going to be selling to them. I mean,
so as soon as it's packaged, you would put a label on it, right?
Yeah, you could package it, label it, and then of course shipping frozen product, and then you need a distribution network. I mean, I'm sure you face a lot of the same things where you have the big big brand name equipment that have distribution and dealerships all over the country. Like, how do you handle as a business getting your product out and then into the hands of the people who need to use it? Because it's a very similar problem. I mean, we're talking meat, yeah, you're talking metal, but you're still moving something from A to B.
It's a struggle, and I mean, we have largely existed within the John Deere distribution network for the past 5 years. There was a period of time at the beginning of my career when we were probably equally prevalent in Kinsey dealers. That's kind of shifted way more in favor of John Deere. And I mean, honestly, John Deere crushes it with distribution. They're a very efficient company. I mean, I was kind of raised in a green family, and I've come to realize, there might be some opportunities. I'm really hoping to branch out and sell some products in the CNH distribution network too, and just not be so focused on one color, because we are really leaving some buyers behind when we're doing that. And sort of breaking out. But on some of our other products, when I'm talking about this sort of alternative strategy that we're moving in regenerative agriculture with underground ag, we're going to take more of a direct-to-consumer approach on that. Or we're going to sell through kind of influencers and thought leaders.
Because I guess your underground ag would be closer to, and you might even kind of just touch on that for guys. I mean, I follow you and kind of have an idea. I watched it. It looks like a label. Your logo looks like a chicken. I may be wrong.
No, that's Dawn Equipment.
Oh, that's Dawn. Okay, so what's the under?
It's the rooster, not the chicken.
The rooster. Yeah. Okay. Well, my bad. I'm sorry.
It's about small, fierce. Okay, we're this little company in this industry with all these big players, and they're like stomping around, kicking us around, but we're just, we'll just keep pecking at their heels. It's that
I love that visual. That's
small company, and we'll have fun with it. We'll experiment with it and have fun with it. We're gonna come out with an advertisement soon, which will be a very fun ad that most people will see.
But that's kind of the nature of what you're asking me, is how do you go from like, okay, I've got the product. I have no qualms about the quality of the animal that I raise. We eat it ourselves. And it's like, and with social media, social networking, I mean, I've been able to build a substantial following on Twitter, and that kind of led me to branch out and do this podcast, which is growing. And so I kind of have an idea of how to scale up the message, but getting the physical product. I mean, because really at the end of the day, if I'm selling something, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the beef they're buying in the store. I don't want to trash my other, my peers who are raising a great product in order to promote mine. I think that happens in some of the niche agriculture deals. Like, in order to elevate themselves, they have to then tear down, traditional agriculture. Like, that's the huge movement for the anti-GMOs. There's a lot of this stuff out there that's really unwarranted. And that's fine if people want to buy organic, but realize that there's some pitfalls with that too. But with all that being said, I'm in the same boat you are with your startup company. Is how do you make that jump? Because your original stuff, you're already in the Deere channels. How do you plan on doing that? Like you said, direct ship. Is there any other method?
See, I have a massive advantage though, because virality can exist, right? I basically have faith that if I make something that fundamentally works and that people love, word of mouth, there's really not that many people farming professionally in this country. And they're really on the internet. They're talking to each other. If somebody uses a product they like and it works out for them, word's going to spread really fast. And it's going to work way better than any marketing campaign you can do. Selling beef to a national audience, that's a way more complicated proposition. There needs to be a technology solution out there. There are millions of American consumers that go to the grocery store, go to the meat counter, and want something else, right? They want to know a little bit more about the person who's producing this. They want to know a little bit more about how it's produced. They want to know a little bit more about where it comes from, right?
They want to brag to their neighbors, say, look where I bought my beef. Here's a video of these guys out doing their stuff. I mean, it's a whole social aspect. It's there's a lot of ways to play that card.
So how do you do it? And maybe there needs to be some disruption in the packing industry. So say you've got your 500 cows, right? You send them to slaughter, and they get frozen, packed, blah blah blah. So the packing industry, they have to move that stuff out of there and get it out right away, right? They're not a warehouse.
No, there is a certain amount of meat that's in cold storage. I mean, that's just kind of a rolling number, but it can't stay there forever. It's kind of like first in, first out. I mean, I'm sure they have the same model that anybody else would. They want to kill it, get the margin, move the meat, move on to the next thing.
So there should be some packing house that becomes the smart packing house that starts carrying the individual farmer or rancher's identity through to the consumer.
Oh, there's niche deals where they try to move branded product, and they're successful to a point, but truly you're dealing with kind of a the main 3 or 4 people with the network to do it. I mean, it will happen. I don't doubt that it'll happen. It's just a question of, once somebody understands it, is that going to turn into a monopoly? Like, it currently is, and they control that back into the market. So once they discover, okay, like we can do this and add margin, why would they, there's not a good faith deal that it's like, let's just hand some of this down to the producer. That just doesn't happen. I wish it did, but I don't see that. I'm not as optimistic that will happen.
I'm trying to think of what.
But I mean, yes, at the end of the day, you're selling yourself. And that's where I've seen some of, you talk about not very many people. I've been really amazed at, getting involved with ag media and some of this stuff, and just kind of seeing the scope and the numbers. Yeah, there's just a handful of people that do this professionally for a living, farming and ranching. And I don't know what that number is, but I'm going to say it's a couple 100,000, maybe 300,000. I don't know what that number is, but it's far, far, far smaller than most people give credit for. And I think, to your point earlier that you were saying about, if you create something that is good, people will go to it. And I firmly believe that. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this podcast is, I want content that I would listen to. I want something that I would want to be engaged with. So I want to make good content. And if it goes, it goes. If it doesn't, I'm not going to do anything that I don't want to be doing. And hopefully people are drawn to that. And if they aren't, that's fine. I'm right back where I was when I started. I'm still farming and ranching. So.
I listen to a ton of podcasts myself. I listen to them all the time. I never listen to the radio anymore. And I listen to podcasts when I'll drive cross country, and I'll listen to hours and hours and hours of podcasts. I think that podcasting is poised for immense growth, and it is growing super fast too.
And that's where I find myself. If I'm spending hours and hours on harvest or planting, or which, I guess if they make autonomous tractors and kick us out, we won't be doing that. But but you have a lot of idle, especially with auto steer. I mean, when that changed the game, auto steer. And then I got on Twitter in 2009, and for the last almost 10 years, I've just been making smart ass jokes and it's worked, because I've been able to network and reach out to a huge audience that otherwise I would have been isolated. I would have been in the middle of kind of a literal nowhere. But the game has changed so much that a small voice can be heard by a large audience. And
you've got what, 12,000 followers? I looked.
Yeah,
earlier.
It's around 12,000.
It's a lot of followers. Who's your main competitor in the ag podcasting space?
Oh, I don't know that I'll say there's a guy who's been doing it longer than me that is a rock star, and that's that Rob Sharkey of Shark Farmer. Yeah,
I see so much of his content on Twitter. I've never actually listened to the podcast. Is it a good podcast?
No, it's a great podcast. He's a really, really good dude, and he's been awesome to help me out. And anytime I run into stuff, and that's what's cool about right now within this little segment of media in agriculture is there's so few of us that we all kind of know each other and we help each other out, and it's not really like a competition of who gets what. I mean, and because there's really not a competition. And Rob's on satellite radio and doing awesome.
He's on satellite radio?
Yep, he's on satellite radio. But that's how fast this moves. It's that he started out just like, hey, I want to do a podcast. And within a couple of years, he blew up. And I think a lot of it goes back to, and I don't want to piss anybody off, but some of the old agriculture media kind of got stuck in that. Like you were quoting earlier, you manufacture something, you make it, and then you get to this point where you're just like, this is what people want, so we're going to keep doing it. And I feel like kind of this new, and I love it kind of almost from a pirate radio aspect. I'm going out, I get to do what I want when I want it. I get to reach out to cool guys like you and say, hey, do you want to do this? And so far, pretty much everybody's been like, sure, I'll do it. And you end up with these awesome off the wall conversations where we're talking about how to ship beef.
Do you ever read farm magazines?
I did when I was a kid, just like everybody else. You get them and you're sitting there at the table and you thumb through them. And I'd say whenever Twitter started, that's really when I still got them, but I really don't look at them. I mean, honestly, because when you start to read the content, 99% of it we've already discussed on social media. It's a latent thing. Now there's still a market for it, but I don't know how much, the transition of time. I mean, where do you find to get your best bang for your buck on advertising?
I don't know. I had this a couple of years ago. We used to actually have kind of an advertising marketing budget, and we would spend a few $100,000 a year on traditional marketing.
You want to sponsor a podcast?
That's a very small amount. I have sponsored a podcast. I've sponsored the No-Till Farmer Strip-Till podcast, which I would be happy to sponsor more podcasts because I do think it's a good bang for the buck. Honestly, of the traditional ag media publications, I'll put in a plug. I think Mike Lessiter over at Lessiter Publications, those guys try and do a little bit more specific stuff. And
I don't know the people. Like, what magazines would that be?
Like No-Till Farmer and stuff like that. I mean, it's industry specific stuff, and they really do a good job. But I don't know. I would put the question to you: what do you think? The farmer, are you in your 30s or 20s?
I'm 41.
You're 41, just into 40.
Yeah, I'm just a hair older than you.
Man,
so
I'm cruising into 40. Like I've got gray hair coming in bad, and it's like, man, it's not as easy to lose 15 pounds as it used to be.
Well, I promise you, everything that you've heard about turning 40 is absolutely true. You start to realize that you're closer to the back end than you are the front, and it is psychological, but there is something that changes, and your physical, everything slows down, but I love it. I think the 30s were great. I'm looking forward to the 40s, but this is something about agriculture that I think other industries don't deal with. You and I are still considered like young pups. I mean, we're middle-aged men, but yet we're still kids in our industry.
You want to talk about something that will make me go literally bonkers crazy?
I want to hear it, because that's where we're going.
I will have people that I'm like almost 40, and I will have people either on like New Ag Talk or at a farm show or something literally call me Jim's boy. And I'm like, come on, the guy's been retired for 5 years. I have 17 US patents, and I'm still Jim's boy, which my father was like great for me and taught me so much, and I respect the guy a lot, and he got me, gave me that jumping block. But there is this ageism about the industry too.
You bet.
You go to all the farm, like these conferences and everything like that, it's all like guys in their like 60s and whatnot, and and nothing against them, they've got a lot of experience too, but you know what I'm talking about. There's something about it.
No, and I'd say that that is a shift I'm starting to see. I'm starting to see younger people get into, when you talk about conferences. I mean, one that I went to last year that I'd never been to was FBN, and I like FBN some with it, but they're a younger mindset. The people who run it, the organization as a whole, kind of have a different outlook. There's other companies out there that are the same, but there's more younger driven companies that are there. And I think you'll see them emerge. I mean, look at your company. I mean, you're driving yours. And I think that's something to be noted, that there are people out there. And I think that that's going to continue to grow. Now, I mean, my grandfather passed away before I started, and I kind of took over after he had a stroke when I was very young. So I started when I was 18. I've been doing this for 20 some odd years. And when I first started, I was the kid, literally. And, the cool thing I found, I was young and I had all these ideas. And I was going to set the world on fire. I'm going to do it like I know how to do it, and everybody else just is stuck in their ways. And I had to break a lot of shit. I had to break a lot of things and prove it didn't work my way. and then realize that the experience that the older generation had was there for a
Yeah.
reason. And when you can kind of meld those two with the useful energy, with the experience and knowledge, and you put those together, and then you have almost like a hybrid or a an alloy that you can do so much more with. When you can take that experience from the older generations and the energy from the young, like we
Yeah,
can
I
do
totally
so
agree.
much
This is
more.
the sweet spot right here. So like I said before, those early years of my career, oh, I was so dumb. And like just the mistakes you got to make and everything
But
like that.
you
And like,
had to make those mistakes. If you
yeah,
didn't,
I could have probably listened a little bit more too. A lot of you look back at it now and you think, oh, that was really good advice that you didn't take, though that there's just some kind of best practices about how you do.
but anybody worth their salt had to buck that trend. You have to make your own mistakes, because if you listened and you would have taken that advice and you had not made your mistakes, you wouldn't have the same perspective and outlook you do right now.
Yeah, you wouldn't really learn it in the same way. There's the pain and the suffering of just being like, oh man, I have screwed this up.
Yes,
So
losing has a purpose.
yeah.
Losing serves to remind you what not to do, and you
Oh,
have to have that in everything, not in business and life. And we've nerfed the world to the point that some people don't. There's such a fear of failure. Failure should be embraced, because that means it stopped you from doing the same thing over
right.
and over again. Just like you said, if you have a product that doesn't catch you and grab you, you know when to cut your losses and run. But how did you learn that?
Right. Oh man. And just and also the four design rule, just knowing that you need to go back to the drawing board that one last time. But I do agree. I think that this age that we're at right now, call it 35 to 45, you've gotten that early experience out of the way, but you're young enough where I can grind the hours, do the work, and just grind it out. I think this is going to be like I'm going to be heading into the most fruitful years of my career over the next 5 years, and I'm going to take on a very big project. And I think I used to jump between things so much, way too much, and I was in the field running this demonstration like on Friday with these Ukrainian guys, the snow on the ground, and we're doing the strip till demo, and I was like, man, this thing's really working well. And I was looking at our strip till unit, and I was like, if you would have thought that product that really had its inception in like 2005, 2007, and you look at where it is today, there's something to sticking with something, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like Porsche with the 911. You go back and the car kind of looks the same as it did in the 50s, and just sticking with it and iterating. That was one of the real mistakes I made early in my career, was just jumping. Oh, something's wrong, so I'm going to completely throw it away and start something new. Well, sometimes, you got to just like stick with it and just see it out, stick with it long term, because sometimes, things are going to go up, they're going to go down. You're not going to just, it's not going to be all roses right away. You got to.
No. Well, and that's something that whenever you talk about sticking with it, I'm reminded of another thing in your feed, and that's, you seem to have an affection for hockey.
Oh yeah.
So did you start hockey when you were young? Because I'm 40, and if I went out and I loved to play football growing up. If I went and played football, I'd probably fall over from multiple things. But how is it? Because you've obviously stuck with hockey. You still play it, right?
Oh yeah. So I played when I was young. I've always played goalie. I've never played a position other than goalie. And, I stopped after high school, and kind of, one thing after another. And then I get into, a few years ago, my daughter's born, and you kind of have that profound moment, and I'm like, man, I'm not getting any younger, am I? I'm 35. I need to do something, to kind of keep me healthy. Unlike you as a farmer rancher, I sit at a desk a lot.
Yeah, but I sit in a tractor. Yeah, we do physical labor, but it's not like, the guy with the pitchfork and his wife throwing bales. That doesn't happen anymore.
How many hours a day do you sit in a tractor though?
Oh,
Oh,
well, I mean, when
during the
you're
season,
during the season, yeah, you're 10 to 12 hours a day when you're going. Now, when you're not, yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate. I like having cattle because that is more of a physical exercise. You have to do, build fence. You have to work cattle. Now, farming, now you might throw some bags, but
oh, you
farming
know,
isn't near as hard as it used to be.
you know what I think is criminal though, when I do get out with customers and I'm in a tractor, is the ergonomics of it suck, right? So
If you're in the buddy seat, you get that one sucks.
even if you're not in the buddy seat, the reality of modern farming is that the tractor drives itself, and you're like a conductor looking back at the orchestra here. Why the seat needs to turn all the way around, or at least a hell of a lot more. I mean,
Man, yes.
you do that for 10 hours a day. Is your neck messed up from straining, turning your
Your
neck
back will
all the
hurt.
time?
Yeah, because of course, I think most of our neck hurts from looking down at our phone because that's primarily what you do. You're just a monkey up there watching monitors. And once you get it set, you're kind of good and you just kind of ride through life. But no, I'm dumbfounded why we still have a tractor cab that looks like it came out of, when they just built a box and they just keep changing the box. Let's put a lazy boy in that son of a bitch.
Is
Why
there
can't we do that?
some legal requirement that because it's an on-road vehicle, the seat has to not be able to go completely around? I mean, I don't know
I've,
if there's some sort of like, requirement that that's the case, but I think it's a way worse requirement that you're going to take an entire generation of farmers that now are empowered to spend way more time in the cab because this kind of automation is letting them basically work more hours than
you
you could
bet.
before, or work more hours in a sort of healthy way. And you're spending, 10 hours a day doing this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not only that, you're always turning to your right,
Yes.
normally, because it's all designed in like one-handed way to always go this way.
I wonder why that is. Like, why are we still holding on to that model?
Uh
Because that's the way
because
everybody does it.
they think the most people are right-handed and they want the majority of the controls on the right hand, and so on and so forth. But so when I design in computer-aided design, like I'm sitting in my chair right now,
Yeah, which
I I
people should go
actually
look through his pictures, and you can see a picture of this. It's amazing. It looks like a spaceship, like something out of Star Trek almost.
so I get a huge amount of fatigue when I'm designing in CAD for long periods of time, just with my mouse hand and my. So I key with my left and I mouse with my right, and you'll actually get kind of like strain in your wrist. But I use a different device in my left hand now that reduces my stress, to kind of share more of the load between. I almost use two mouses instead of one mouse, that in order to reduce the load on just my one hand.
Well, this is where I noticed whenever we first got auto steer, and you talk about doing other things, the internet was, you could connect to a laptop, but you had to have a key card. I mean, it was a whole mess to get like connectivity back, like let's just say 10 years ago. But I was able to kind of get enough that I could actually do trading commodities, and I would trade, on a live feed platform from the tractor, because it's like I got 8-10 hours a day to kill. So trade commodities, and that's social media. You find outlets for this, because if you just sat there and listened to the radio, you would literally go nuts. And eventually, if I could find a microphone that had enough noise canceling deal, I'd podcast from the damn thing. But there's not enough bandwidth. There's not enough noise canceling stuff out there, and you might accidentally have to stop and get out and fix something. But yeah, we are granted 8 to 10 hours every day during these busy times of just, you can do whatever you want. It's kind of ironic torture that you're stuck in this little seat for that amount of time.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. Are you excited for autonomy? Are you excited for a day when you don't have to sit in there?
I don't know. At some point, okay, if you introduce autonomous and it's great and everybody runs out and buys it and now they have it on their farm, what's the point of a farmer anymore? Are we just the guy who then greases, maintains, and fills up the autonomous tractor? Because then why would you, if you don't have enough, if you don't want to be there to do the operation, why would you want to be there to just service and maintain the piece of equipment who's doing the work for you? So then you get into the obsolescence of the actual human themselves. And I don't I don't think it's going to happen for at least 50 to 60 years, because you've got to kill my generation, and you've even got to kill the generation that's coming up after me. You've got to get rid of the people who still have the nostalgic feel for driving a tractor.
You got to make
And
shit that doesn't break or plug.
yes, and you also, it has to be where it will virtually take care of it. I think you're going to see not a model like Case built where it's a tractor. Do you knock the cab off? You're going to see something like the C-Dot run deal, where it's just electric. You plug it in, it goes out, and it moves, and it does. And I mean, I think that's the model that we'll go to. But I don't think I'll see it in my life. You'll see it, but it may be an adaptation. I mean, why would you take the cab away if you could use that tractor in the winter to feed, but then make it autonomous the other time? I mean, the reality of autonomy, I think, is kind of comical at times.
I think the autonomy is in the short term going to be a very bad thing. And the reason why is that it's going to force here's my prediction. Okay. Is that automation over the next 5 to 10 years is going to cause a dramatic increase in the number of acres that are conventionally tilled. Okay. Because if you've got automation, you got to do stuff that's low management and simple, right?
You bet. And so you can just drag a plow,
drag a disc ripper or something to anybody. You can have right now. It's like what operation you're from. You can be like, grab some high school kid and throw him out there and just let him drive across the field. What operations are those?
Yeah, you're gonna plow.
That's the way people think about tillage, right? It's just like, it doesn't matter. Just have them go out there or stock shredding or all sorts of different things. And then you look at this see and spray weed technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, the see and spray weed technology over the next 5 or 10 years is going to work a hell of a lot better against a clean black background than against a dense, thick cover crop mat.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to, all of a sudden it's going to be just easy. Oh, okay. Now when you don't even have to sit in the cab of the tractor anymore, it's like, go out there, just moldboard plow it. Who cares? I don't have to sit there. I'll just have the robot go out and do it. Oh, it makes it easy. It's lower management. That's my real fear with it in the short term is that you're going to see these ultra sort of low management systems coming along.
Well, and after you get past that iteration of it, I mean, if I were to design in my perfect world, it would be with like the see and spray technology that you're quoting there, where you send it out and you only load 15 gallons of product or whatever, and it goes and takes care of the whole field, and it's all done, via a remote source. I have to do my own spraying, so I know the complications, the reality of that. But the see and spray technology is a great adaptation. Now you do that, you could automate planting. I think it would be hard to automate harvesting because you can't deal with things like, obstacles getting in a header, like a tumbleweed getting on a deal where this, it starts pushing the corn down in front of you, or a row getting plugged. I mean, there's still things that computers aren't going to be able to conceptualize and go through the logic. Like, I mean, yes, artificial intelligence will get there, but for the time being, that decision-making process is so complex from a standpoint of keeping that machine operational that there's not, I mean, you can make it run, and we're doing that right now. We're doing that with auto steer. But the only reason the person is there is to take care of the problems that arise. And right now, the technology doesn't exist to solve the problems when they arise.
Yeah. So even setting a combine is an exceptionally complicated thing to do with like artificial intelligence. And, the big players have been trying since the late 70s to use computers to automatically set the various settings in a combine to replace an operator or to take a lower skill operator. And it's been extremely hard to do. And it's only, I think, recently that you're starting to have actual progress being made in that way.
Well, and another thing about a computer, they can't step out on the deal and say, oh, it's cloudy and everything's tough. They can't grab a leaf and feel it and say, this is going to feed through slower. Or they can't smell smoke coming from the engine.
Right.
I mean, you're driving and you smell, hey, that's fire. There's a human basic evolutionary instinct of the thing I'm on is on fire. I need to stop and go check for a bad bearing. I mean, and to what purpose does it serve to remove the human? I mean, we've already removed the human for the most part in food production. Now, why are we going to invest this much technology and time to get rid of the last
Right.
the last of the Mohicans. We need to drive the last of these farmers out of their tractors because they
Why?
need to be doing what else? What are we
Yeah.
going to be? What are we going to go take a job at the factory that builds the machines that are automated? Like to what end are we removing the farmer from the equation? What
Yeah.
purpose does it serve?
Why? What good does it do? Are you going to make more money doing it?
No,
Uh,
I'll probably go spend more money, or I will find a different job, or God help me if this podcast takes off,
if
I will do this full time. I mean,
if farming gets easier, wouldn't commodities be like? Wouldn't that put downward pressure on it? Like, isn't there something about like, as it's easier and easier to do, it's just like that's the whole thing about this business that's maddening, is that the better and better you do at it, the lower and lower everything's worse. It's like, okay, look at the past. I mean, I remember when my career started, growing 200 bushel corn, that was a big deal. I mean, now it's like 200 bushel corn. It's like, what a loss.
like what went wrong where you only got 200 bushels?
Yeah. What terrible fertilizer program have you used, but
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, yes, the better we do, the worse off we are. And back to what I was talking about earlier, I mean, as soon as you develop this technology and you outsource it to where land is cheap and still fertile because it hasn't been farmed for the last 100 years, I mean,
yeah.
good night. I mean, then are we just a tourist industry? Hey, come ride the old tractor. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I know it's scary as hell to
You
be a
know,
guy that does this for a living.
I think they need to change the CRP program dramatically, like when we were talking before. And I've talked about this. When you have this whole farm ERP software, so you're getting that real-time profitability feedback on your operation, you should be able to take arbitrary, small, money-losing parts of the field and put them into CRP, in my personal opinion.
It would be much
So,
better for wildlife.
yeah, so you create environments for wildlife, and you just say, look, this spot in the field, there's if you go east of me, a couple miles down the road here, there's a spot next to this river that floods every single year, yet for some reason they keep growing something out there, and I'm like, why? What are we doing? Why are we growing something here? It is completely pointless. There's something broken in a system where we're just repeatedly, it floods every year. Every
Well,
single year it floods.
you get crop insurance on the whole field. You get paid for the production on the whole. I mean, the model isn't built so you can break it down to little areas. Now, will that change? Maybe, but if you were to do that, okay, let's just venture down the rabbit hole of let's expand CRP, okay, and you idle these acres, however you do it, whether through government or private funding, whatever the source of the money is, you idle acres, and then you're taking food out of the production system. In the short term, that's going to drive food prices up. Is that going to be very popular with the general public? I mean, the minute things get higher, you immediately hear like screaming bloody murder that these guys are trying to they're trying to take all our money, so forth. So I mean, politically, you're going to have a hard time doing that. And then realistically, when you start to drive the prices up, you also encourage production in third world, or let's just not even say third world, just other parts of the world. That's what happened when corn went to $6. Everybody else said, well, we can grow it too. So then if that guy goes and idles that pond and he doesn't, never grows in there, but he does it on a mass scale all across America, we take the acres out that aren't producing. Those acres are going to be slashed and burned in another country and planted, and boom, there you go. The system balances itself. And now the thing that, I mean, this is a bit of an anarchist look at the world, but I'm ready for a bad natural disaster to come through and kind of remind people the value of food. I mean, it's very commonplace and easy to dismiss the safe food supply because no one's ever, I mean, who has went to a grocery store and they're out of everything? I'm talking like Venezuela, where you can buy toilet paper and tissues and that's it. I mean, there's no food. That hasn't happened in our lifetime. It hasn't happened in our parents' lifetime.
Oh, people don't even know what they got. I mean, it's too much choice. It's way, way too much choice. I don't even I go to the grocery store with my wife and I look at it. I'm like, I don't even want to choose. It's just too frustrating to even choose between different products. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we as a country, and not just country, as humans, have evolved to hack the system amazingly well. I mean, you just a simple example that I look at is a paved road. Okay, it used to be wagons on a wagon trail. Then somebody said, well, if we blade this off and make it flat dirt, we can go faster. We can get different things, and that's awesome. Then somebody said, let's get some oil and rocks, throw them together, and let's make it smooth asphalt that doesn't mud up in the rain. So you've got, I mean, amazingly awesome thing, a flat surface you can drive 80 miles an hour from one coast to the other. But yet, do people look at a road and be like, how awesome is that? Oh, they think, why isn't this road better? If there's a pothole, it's not, nobody stops to think how amazing it is that you have pavement from one coast to the other. But that's a pretty damn amazing feat in itself.
I remember being down in Argentina like 7 or 8 years ago, and there would just be no money, right? Like you'd go to an ATM, there'd be no money. You'd go to another ATM, there'd be no money. You'd go to like 8 or 10 ATMs just to get $50. And then everywhere you go, people are just standing in line, and it's. I've been to a lot of countries. I've been to countries where I love to go to a grocery store in every country I go to, where you don't have the choice that we have. You go to the store, and you've got a couple different kinds of things. And I think increasingly younger consumers are. I was listening to this other podcast this morning on the way to ice hockey about this company called Brandless that is doing a lot. And so basically the hypothesis on this company is that younger consumers are like a lot of those brands that we all know, that we see, whether it's like, consumer packaged goods like Palmolive and whatever, stuff you'd see in your kitchen, things like that, that are so ingrained in us that we just know them. They're a part of our society. And increasingly they're finding that younger consumers actually are kind of turning against traditional brands, and that they're not looking for traditional brands in the same way. And
Do you think that's their revolution? I mean, like the '60s had the people who revolted against conformity and the hippies and drugs and anything else. Is this generation's revolt against consumerism, like branded products and that kind of mentality?
Right. And I think it's going to have immense ramifications in agriculture in some ways. When you look at some of the food delivery startups, okay, products like, there's this one company like Postmates, or on the West Coast, there's this product called Good Eggs, which is basically a premium food delivery startup where, it's for affluent consumers, but you with a click of a button, you're selecting premium, known provenance products. Like, okay, I'll select I want Jared McDaniel super high quality beef here. Bam, direct to consumer, and it arrives in perfect packaging, arrives in one day. Everything, breads from bakers, all sorts of products that are things that it's just an on-demand delivery system. And when you talk about disintermediating the meat packer or all of that machinery in the beef industry between you and the consumer, you are seeing the start of direct-to-consumer foods where people are choosing to buy products from certain types of companies to have this different experience about it, right? To have a more premium experience, or to have the convenience of it, and so on and so forth. So I do think there's going to be a lot of change, and maybe that's one of the places where, things are going to change. Okay, so say you've got your beef here. Consumer in, North Texas, Tulsa, all around, even Denver, draw a 200-mile radius around you.
Yeah.
How many consumers are in that 200-mile radius around you?
Oh, a lot.
Why does your beef, where does your beef go when you sell your beef?
It'll go, primarily to a feedlot in, Southwest Kansas, in the Texas Panhandle. It'll go there, get fed out, slaughtered. And then from there, I'm going to assume it just enters the food chain and then gets warehoused and, could be shipped anywhere in the country. I don't know. I mean, I've never done traceability studies because, I mean, I've owned them all the way to the kill floor and even received premiums based upon how the carcass did on the grid. But that's kind of like that's where the trail ends for me. Like, I know I've been in packing houses. I've seen it happen. I've seen the animal, you know, taken into all the different pieces and parts, and I've seen the inside of the industry, but it's all built upon efficiencies. And this is something that not only in the meat packing, but this is agriculture and as a general. All we've done is we just continue to buy efficiencies. We buy efficiencies. We keep doing this and getting more efficient and better. And then all we do is trade part of ourselves for it. Because now I have, as an industry, the beef industry no longer owns the hamburger. We own the commodity till it gets to the guy who makes the hamburger. And it's honestly, it's the guy who makes it and then sells it to someone else who makes the hamburger. I mean, it's very much like take for a lumber industry. They make the wood, but they don't make furniture. And even if they made furniture, they don't make the kind that gets sold in high-end stores. They may have made the wood, but no one cares where the wood came from as of right now. But in your model and what you're describing, I could definitely see that happen. You know, but people have to survive long enough to get to that point.
Yeah. There's a lot of cost, though, associated with moving that beef all over the place, right?
You bet.
I mean, if you have something that doesn't look completely different than the current sort of beef industry, but it just like you have a more regionalized approach to it.
Well, think of how Amazon or some of these people distribute packages. It wouldn't be much different. It would just be done in a frozen setting. I mean, I think that Amazon and Prime and the Whole Foods model, it makes sense that they bought them. I mean, because they're looking at the same thing you're describing, is how can we personalize it? Then you get into really a philosophical argument. Should every single person have their own personal catered to life? Now, as an individual, I say I want my needs catered to, of course. But as a society, do we all deserve to have our own everything? I mean, you're really getting into a moral conundrum there, because in order for everybody to have everything, a substantial number of people on the planet have to go without under the current circumstance, right?
I'll tell you what, I was actually talking with my wife about this over brunch. Like, just dealing with it, I have very little time. I'm running a business. Any free time I have, I play ice hockey. I want to spend a certain number of hours a week with my daughter, who's 3, and to just focus on that stuff. Dealing with, and I talked to Rachel today, like we're supposed to go to the grocery store and we're like, let's what are we gonna make, and like, what is the stuff we need? And I'm like, why do we have to think about this stuff? You know what I'd love is just where I'd love artificial intelligence is like something that just like you give it some basic information. And I'm sure this product already exists.
Isn't it like Blue Wave, or there's a meal delivery system where they send everything that's, I think it's like, it's not Blue Wave. No,
I know what you're talking about. Blue something. There's a bunch of startups in that space too. And
they ship you all the pieces and you just throw it in the oven and go.
Where I don't even have to think about it. It's just, and it's good quality food and blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to have to just have the intellectual overload of thinking about meals and think about it.
But here's another maybe conundrum you're putting yourself into. What if the simple act of deciding what your meal is going to be and actually making it, savoring it, what if that becomes the goal? What if all the intellectual overload that you're putting yourself into, because I see this in farming, like I'll go out and I'll work all the time and you do all this stuff. And as your kid gets older, because I've got 6 kids, age 4 to 15, I find myself, I will do anything possible to spend less time at work, less time thinking about work, and more time with my kids. That's how my priorities have shifted, and yours will too as your kid gets older. But but with that being said, the simple act of being at home and being able to like eat a meal and hang out with my kids, that's more valuable to me now than all the other things. So as your perspective shifts, maybe that your value system will change to where now you're like, I don't want to think about what I want to eat. And one day you might be like, all I want to think about is what I want to eat. All the rest of the stuff is crap.
Let me put it this way. I would love to have my life structured in a way where I had the freedom to devote a lot of time to what I'm going to eat and how it's going to be prepared and so on and so forth. It's just not that way right
Yeah.
now. And
Well, it couldn't be. You're literally running a massive equipment company.
it's and not only that, I have this personal paranoia, right? Like about, because I grew up and saw kind of the rise and fall, and I've been through successes and I've seen failures and different things like that. It's like I'm very paranoid. Even when things are going well, I always feel like there's a snake just waiting to jump out and bite you all the time, and perhaps too much so. And people around me like that paranoia, I think, is actually a very good thing in business, because you always have to be on edge. You always have to be concerned about what else is going on, and it drives you to achieve things very rapidly. But it's not a good, it just doesn't result in I want to live a more a life with a more profound sense of sort of security about it, and less fear of failure. The fear of failure is something that can be a very, very good thing, but can also be a very, very bad thing at the same time. And
Well, you're talking about the duality of being almost risk averse versus diving headlong into the unknown, and you're dealing with the unknown all day. And I would imagine that as you're on edge and you're doing everything and you're hyped up at work, when you come home and sit down and look at your 3-year-old in the eyes, that's a completely different, like that. Two different worlds collide right then, don't they?
Holy smokes, man. I mean, it really challenges me mentally too. Just right over here on the floor, we have this little you ever seen these like calico critters? Do you have a little girl at all? It's like these little plush doll houses things with these, and they've got these tiny little like cups and kitchens and stuff. And it's like I almost have to use like a tweezer, but just I spend a fair amount of time just, she loves playing dolls with these things. And you're dealing with these super abstract situations where it's like the pigs and the bunnies and the bears, and like this one's doing this and this one's doing this, and like you got to like recreate all these situations. And I truly enjoy just the abstraction of playing with a toddler, because there's no, like, she's not limited in what she thinks could happen at all, or what events, and creating these different kind of little mini social microcosms between the different characters and her thing.
Well, you get to peek behind her curtain and see the innocence.
Oh yeah, and she
She
started
hasn't been
drawing.
tainted.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah.
But as a man who has all these kids, I can promise you that those are probably my fondest memories of the last decade easily. I mean, my oldest daughter, when I was, my first kid, I didn't understand what it really meant. And you kind of don't, because you don't know what all this is. And then as they grow up and they get so big so fast, you realize how fleeting that is, and how irresponsible it is to not utilize every moment of it as you can, because they will move on with their lives just like we did. Eventually we got older and we were like, all right, let's go do our own thing. And now I could see in my parents' eyes when you walk out, I get the one. I've got one that's going to be going to college in 3 or 4 years. So, enjoy that time that you're spending with them, because that's truly a valuable intangible that she's letting you into that world. And I mean, there's no amount of winning at the rest of life that'll ever take away from that.
Man, I'll tell you what, when like your work day sometimes is like, just like you feel like a punching bag, and when you come home and she's like, and you have this little girl that just absolutely like just loves you, and there's no kind of like, there's a lot of your in business there, and everything in life is so transactional, right? It's like, what can I do for you and what can you do for me? And to have those kind of interactions which are not transactional interactions, I think are really profound. But I'm going to shift gear with you a little bit.
You bet. We went off the left field.
do you ever feel paranoid about lab-grown meat? And
this is something that in the last year has really kind of surfaced, and I've molded over just in the many hours on a tractor. And the biggest thing I come away with is whenever I get pissed when people get mad at science and like the GMOs or, these things that we develop to make my life easier through genetic traits, through all these things that science has developed in advance. And I embrace it on the farming side. On the ranching side, when I hear lab grown meat, of course, the first thing that goes up is red flags saying, whoa, hold up here, cowboys. That's not an animal. I mean, that's not debatable. But at the same time, if they take, I mean, from a base level, if they take meat cells, culture them, and develop it, it's literally meat. They may not want to call it that, and they may not be attached to a nervous system of an animal, but it is cellular at a cellular level. It's meat. Now, then you get back into where is the value of the human in that equation. And as people come to demonize, people who practice animal husbandry, and that's what I mean. Like, I take care of animals and feed them and take care of them and, put them down if they have a condition that's the only humane thing to do. I mean, as an individual, I practice what I believe to be the best for the animal. Now, if you develop lab grown meat and you completely remove the individual and then you just make this, here's a paste, go eat it, and I have a hard time believing that people are going to fall in love with the idea of eating a lab grown steak. I hope that we don't devolve to the point that there's so many humans left with an unoriginal thought that they would actually prefer the safety mechanism of this sterile protein paste. I mean, somebody may really love it, but how sad would that be if you no longer could enjoy just having a big old juicy hamburger? I mean, at what point? I mean, and if society decides that they want that, then why do I need to keep trying to force my product down their throat? I mean, if you don't want to eat it, I mean, it's just like doing this podcast. If you don't want to listen, that's great. I mean, I'm not going to go grab people and put headphones and be like, you have to hear this. So why would I go grab them and be like, you have to eat my meat? I mean, everybody's free to decide for themselves. It's up to me to offer up something better than what the alternative is.
Oh, and that's what's you want to talk about other. Let's check off box number 2 of things that piss me off about, like, in the egg Twitter sphere. This brand of like egg evangelists that thinks they're in their little bubble and like hashtagging away on like I'm an advocate, blah blah blah. I was like, nobody's listening to you. Consumers aren't listening to you. You're in your own little thought bubble with other people doing the same thing. You're not, you think you're really creating a message which is getting to people or anything like that. It's like, I'm so, screw you consumers, you're dumb consumers.
I've said that
and
before.
It's like, and it's just like, okay, maybe they are dumb, but they're the buyers, right?
Yes. It's self-serving. I say this as someone who has participated a lot, probably on the stupid consumer deal. I agree with you. I think the advocate deal is kind of silly and nonsense, but at the end of the day, it's self-serving. I mean, we do it because it makes us feel better. I mean, that's why I think a lot of that happens. I mean, it's self-soothing. It's whatever you want to call it. We're all just trying to make ourselves feel better about what we do and to justify our existence. I mean, that's part of it.
You've got like coastal urban intellectuals who largely think that farmers are a bunch of idiot hillbillies that they don't need and don't, in the quote unquote flyover states. And they, your average, like, I consume enough mainstream media because I'm not really like in a partisan bubble. I'm completely anti-partisan. I don't believe in partisanship in any way at all. I'm
more libertarian leaning myself. I think both Democrats and Republicans are flawed in so many ways.
And I consume a lot of media, and you see when you get out of like the ag media and get into the mainstream media, and that what people think about farming, what people think about the people that are farmers, and like what it's like, is just completely off in many cases, or not necessarily completely off. It completely lacks nuance. Completely lacks empathy, completely lacks everything. And that also, to me, part of my like I have spent, because of this company and because of the way we are, because we don't have a lot of management tiers in the organization, I spent a huge amount of time out there with the customers, riding the tractor, going to people's farms, doing the work, wrenching on your back in the freezing cold. Like, you know, something breaks down and you're like, well, I guess we're going to just like wrench a bunch of shit off a 36-row planter, like your hands just like, you know. And people don't realize, like, man, it's hard. It's hard work. And you know what? And really, I think farmers don't feel appreciated. And there's so much of this kind of appreciation where like farmers almost overreact when it's like Dodge puts out an ad and it's like, thank you, farmers. And it's like,
that deal's the biggest joke I've ever seen. But I agree with you. It's sad because that is like, we finally got a shot across the bow, and it's like, yes, look at Dodge, they love us. And it's very needy to have need that validation all the time.
And yeah, exactly. It is. It's needy, and because you know what, and you don't that and when you talked about like FBN earlier, right? For me, I have a lot of, for that same reason, like when you have like, I follow a lot of ag tech stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see a lot of this kind of like West Coast tech startup, we're smarter than you, like we're going to just like go out and like show the farmers how to farm because they're just dumb idiots, blah, blah, blah. We'll make them use our drone, blah, 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 software, whatever. Right. And it's just like, to me, it just plays in that whole like, oh, dumb idiots, they don't know anything about technology, blah, blah, blah. That farming is so complicated. When you look at some of the planters and like when I see my customers running it, it's more like being a pilot than being a farmer. Like the picture of it, like the number of different systems you're operating. And like when I was out this fall strip tilling with the customer in Minnesota, and we have like a actively controlled strip tiller with row by row control, and he's got his monitors and like cloud data and a variable rate fertilizer system and all this stuff. I'm like, dude, this is more like being a pilot, and just how tech savvy this guy is too. And like some of the customers, I'm like, man, you've got it. The farmer of the future, if you don't understand basic electronics and basic, you know, things, you're kind of in this in between. You're not really an engineer, you're not really a technician, you're just kind of like, but you have to have this kind of like rounded understanding of a lot of different stuff, whether it be, you know, you're using data, mapping, telemetry, hydraulics, electrics, mechanical stuff, every which way that you have to kind of piece together. It's and
you're doing all this as a means to an end to raise a product that you hope you can sell for all the cost to cover all this. And I mean, I kind of understand what you're saying in that when I first started strip tilling and doing these kind of things, there weren't a lot of systems that evolved to like put on starter fertilizer. So I built my own. I'd find okay, here's a you know, a valve, here's a switch, here's a monitor, you know, you just kind of piece together and you Frankenstein. And here's the difference. And when you build that, you can understand whenever the next generation comes and it's designed for you. You have an appreciation for each little segment of it versus, and this is where the next generation of farmers or kids that come on, all they're going to know is auto steer. They aren't even going to have the mental concept of following a marker. I mean, even following a marker in the field, it laid down those neural pathways which said, this is how you make the tractor go exactly the same distance from the last pass. I mean, it's a very basic fundamental concept, but if all you've ever known is auto steer, you can't conceptualize the reasoning behind that other than make tractor go straight by pushing this button. So you dumb down society by removing each step. And then that's not unique to agriculture. That's with any innovation. I mean, how many people now can fix their cars? I mean, in certain parts of the world, they can't because they have no idea of how carburation works or what timing, ignition, fuel mixtures, airflow. They have no concept of this. I mean, I get to wrench on 454 straight pipe irrigation motors all summer. In some ways, I hate it, but in some ways, I'm very blessed because I can actually look at a motor and make it work when it doesn't. And that how rare of a skill set is that going to be going forward? I mean, you know, people like me watch The Walking Dead and we're like, yeah, we could do that.
So my whole question on that thing, I'll tell you what, I follow a lot of social media, and the most complaining and like I see on any social media is like got irrigation guys bitching about fixing irrigation stuff all the time. And I'm like, for how expensive everything is and how much technology is out there, why can't we make irrigation systems and motors and everything that just doesn't require constantly screwing with it? Why
You
do they have to
can,
why do
you
they have to
can, but
break all the time?
because the technology they have is actually pretty good, and you can put telemetry systems. I mean, I remotely monitor all my sprinklers from the cell phone. It's all tied to a network, but you still have, just like in your line of work, how hard is it to make a bearing that will never ever go out? I mean, so we're talking about like seals in bearings and gearboxes and electric stator motors that are running in literally in a essentially a rainforest in a cornfield that are, you have condensation that gets in there. You have something like a drain plug gets plugged up, and then water condensation will build, and then two wires short out. So you have like this Murphy's law of unknown things that happen. No matter how well designed the systems are, they typically will break at the most inopportune time when you're using them in heavy use. And then, yeah, I mean, and it is glorified as a bit because you're miserable as shit and you're out there trying to be like, well, I want to share this experience. So it doesn't happen all the time, but okay, look at people that go and hunt deer. How many pictures do they take of the deer they just shot? A whole bunch. You would swear that that's all they did year round was hunt deer.
Oh, so you're only seeing the pictures of the
You're only seeing the
broken,
miserable shit. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
it,
That's probably
if I showed you that, okay, for example, like a typical motor might run 2,500, 3,000 hours a season. So that sprinkler turns. Well, everybody glorifies the 5 hours out of the system, out of the year that it doesn't work. So the 2,995 hours that it's working, nobody's out there taking a picture of the system working flawlessly. I mean, so from your perspective, you're seeing the negative, but you're seeing the negative on such a large scale that that's all you recognize. And it's the same thing that happens in organic agriculture or some of these ones like, I found a pesticide in this. Okay. Let's say that pesticide contamination is a real thing and it's at 0.001 of the system. What about the massive, massive, massive quantities of food that are ultimately utterly safe for every human to consume? But what do? I mean, it's done by self-serving organizations, in my opinion. I think that the non-GMO butterfly deal is a farce. I mean, you look at they're selling a big wet security blanket to people, and for what? There's nobody that has been killed by a GMO anything.
because you just have to distance yourself from it and realize that it doesn't. That's the whole thing. People, it you can't. You're not going to change their mind. That it's like the people that are being sold on that non-GMO message, which I'm like super into soil health, I believe I'm going to invest heavily in the organic business. I even think the USDA organic certification label is not strong enough, right? I don't think you should be bringing in products from China and
Oh,
South
hey, you
America
want to talk
and
about
labeling
what
them as organic,
organic
right?
pesticides they use? I wouldn't.
Oh yeah, organic pests. I mean, give me a break. I mean, it is a load.
those are the most toxic shit you can eat ever.
Oh yeah. This is that organic Chinese.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great, and I would love it if we had an organic system that I could work. And if you want to pay me $20 a bushel to raise that corn, well, let's talk. But it will be commoditized. It will be bastardized. It will be turned into the next generation of things that will be overconsumed, and it'll go the way of everything else. I mean, you can change and adapt and you can go to it, but as a means to an end, it's a next step, in my opinion, because I've seen it too many times.
One of my employees, my sales manager Jeff, and I were talking last night. We were drinking a little bit of Hennessy. We were talking about he farms what 200, 500 acres. He's like that prototypical guy, but really interesting young guy. And he was saying, well, he's in a family farming operation, and he actually rents from his cousins, right? And you have this situation playing out all over the place where, okay, so he's renting from his cousins, and his cousins live in California. Okay, and so
Mm-hmm.
you have when you have a situation where, and I think this is going to play out more and more times where you have land ownership being separated from the actual act of farming. So you've got basically people living in California that own your land, and he's like, "Hey, I'm getting into interseeding and cover crops and other things too." And he thinks, you know, that's going to help him actually keep farming this land because his cousins in California are going to be like, "Yeah, good job." They want to see it farmed in a way which is less impactful on the
Okay.
water and use less inputs and things like that.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I think that you're right in a sense. Now, my question to you is, those people who own the land as absentee landowners, and they are going to have a say in what the use of that land is, because ultimately they own it and would have the final control or say of it with a tenant or whoever. Those beliefs or values that they are expressing, even, and then I'm not saying they're right, wrong, or otherwise. I'm not making an ideological judgment. I'm just saying, at what point does the transference of their values onto the land that they are no longer part of stay viable? Because I can promise you, there's people that'll say, like, I want you to do this as a landowner. And I, as a tenant, can say, well, that's great. Good luck finding someone who's going to be able to do this and stay in business underneath these, credentials that have applied to this land.
Mm-hmm.
So I think ultimately the reality check is going to be when these values of these people that when the values don't line up with the physical reality of the actual production practices. Like, you can have people want everything, but you can't give them everything. That isn't possible. I mean, it may be possible for a year or 2 years. I mean, the organic model of, here's how organic is done currently. People are going to take land that is heavily fertilized and all prepped up and ready to go. They're going to transition. In the transitional years, they're going to sell organic products because you can do that now. And then whenever that land becomes not fertile enough to support the organic model, they're going to take it out and heal the soil by vamping it back up with whatever method they need to use of industrial fertilizers. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what happens now. That is the business model for organic industry. You have to make it good enough to get through the time that you don't have access to stuff. Yes, you could build a holistic model where you put in legumes and you have, nitrogen fixing bacteria. That can be built, but to a means to what end? So that your landowner in California feels better about himself, while you might happen to make less money than if you were to do it another way. So then you get into the urban rural. It's almost like, are the rural people, do they exist to serve the interests and values of the urban people, not on an economic level, but on a philosophical level?
Well, there's some deep questions there too, and we have a fundamentally different perspective because you are a farmer and I sell equipment, and so I basically am, look for trends and look for places where I'm going to create a strategy, and I don't feel as ideologically centered around it the one you do. But one thing we agree on is the current organic business model and the way most organic crops are produced in this country, I don't find to be very sustainable, and I don't really think is the future.
No.
I'm interested in that regenerative business. I'm interested in making you, the farmer, what I'm asking the question: how do you make the most money per acre, and then work backwards from there?
Well, at this point in time, with the prices where they're at, it's simply a volume. It's a numbers game. How much output can I get, and then do that to scale that I can spread my expertise, knowledge, and equipment over however many acres. And the limiting factor is how much time and how much of myself am I willing to give up in exchange for a dollar value. So that ultimately is the equation that I think I operate with, and I think most people do. And it's not a value judgment. I mean, hell, if I had my way, I would love to be in your model of, let's do this sustainably, let's do it holistically, let's make it where everything is wonderful. But
you can't. You don't have the water to make the system work.
Like, even if I had the water, that went out the window decades ago. When people decided they wanted cheap food, that's when the turn happened. And that was long before you and I got here.
I don't think people deserve cheap food, or they may want cheap food, but I don't think we're obligated to give them cheap food. Why
Well,
is
I think society thinks that we do.
obligated to give them cheap food? Look, how much do French people and Europeans and even South Americans, how much does anybody else in the world, what percentage of their income do they spend on food?
I don't know. I would love to know that.
Americans pay the lowest amount of their percentage of their income on food than anyone else in the world.
And this is where you and I agree. I think that people should pay more for food. I think it should be a more equitable system for the people that are making the food. But for whatever reason, it's always been this game of let's make it cheaper, let's make it more. And that's the operation that we're in.
Because the system isn't built to serve the farmer.
No.
The system has never been built to serve the farmer. The system is built to serve other people. It's built to serve the shareholders. It's built to serve consumers. It's built to serve politicians that want to stay in power. It's built to serve basically everyone other than the producer.
I agree. So my question to you is, with the producer's number being so small, like what recourse or what repercussions do we have, or what power is left to wield to the people other than, I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe everybody goes organic, holistic in this model, and then production drops and price goes up. I mean, that is basically the only feasible way to change the system as I see it. I mean, what power do we have?
Right. You can go to a McDonald's, right, and get like a Big Mac for $1, right?
Yes.
$1. You can get this, I mean, I just don't even know that we're serving anyone. The only thing I know is that consumers are going to drive it, and that if consumer trends are going a certain way, if there's consumers out there that are willing to spend more money for something, then there's opportunity there.
Okay, let me and to go full circle. I mean, even you being here today on this podcast, and this. I had not an epiphany, that's not the right word, but many years ago when I was developing in agriculture and kind of finding my way, I'd hear talk about the markets and what was going on, what was happening. And I kind of set out on a journey. Where's the nexus of this information? Where does it come from? And I was like, I'm going to go, to the beginning of the creek. Where did all this come from? And when I went, I just found that it was basically the people who had the loudest voice, and not even the loudest voice. They were just the most listened to. And at the end of the day, like you were pointing out, they wasn't serving the interest of a producer, of me as a person out here farming and ranching. And so when I was finally, I even did a show back on the internet, and it was called BTFD TV. It was with a group, and this was in 2013 or 14. And I got a small glimpse of what the possibility was of kind of having the reins taken off and being able to do your own thing, communicate directly. And that started, and it kind of stopped, and I saw what worked and what didn't. And with the iteration of this podcast and some of these other means and methods of being able to go directly to people, I mean, my initial thought was this is unfiltered. And hence the name kind of developed into AgUncensored, because I feel that ultimately if someone sits there and listens to our conversation for 2 hours, they're going to have a much greater understanding than a 30-second soundbite of a Dodge Ram commercial with some dude throwing a hay bale and everybody feels good and they love it. And it tugs at the emotion strings, and there's all that. It's just bullshit. But why not have a real conversation, a real discussion between, we may disagree on some things, but we can at least talk about it. Yeah. And the podcast format, as you pointed out earlier, it's a way for these long form conversations to happen. And so now they're becoming of record. They're becoming in existence. Now, I don't know how to, I know how to scale it. I know that comes with like other means and methods and sponsorship and a lot of that other stuff. But
yeah, I mean, there could be sponsorship too. And I mean, maybe.
But I like not being sponsored. As stupid as that sounds, I like doing my own thing, not being beholden to anybody.
Only take sponsorship from products or companies that you truly believe in.
I agree. I agree 1,000%.
If you truly believe in a product like that you think is a great product and you don't mind attaching your brand to, then attach sponsorship from that. I mean,
yeah.
Hey, let me ask.
But that's how you get the message out, and that's how I think that to communicate to the consumers, as you were alluding to earlier, their minds won't be changed, but they can at least hear the uncensored side of my story. I mean, whether or not that does any good, I don't know. I have to feel it does better than anything else that's out there. The advocate crowd that's screaming. I mean, I don't listen to them.
Do you think you have in your network on social media, you've broken outside of the kind of, egg echo chamber, and you have a diverse range of followers?
To a small extent, in the sense that I'm maybe with traders in like a urban setting like Chicago and some of that, But as far as you know, vegan moms in San Francisco, no, not so much. I'd like to embrace that. I'd like to go into uncomfortable areas of people that aren't traditionally in maybe just right in our line of work, and that's why I reached out to you, because I think that you think outside the box, in that you're not just like every other equipment manufacturer, and that's part of why I approached you about doing this, is that you're not off the radar, but you're far enough off center that it's a nice dovetail out of the usual conversations,
So much of our society has just become people calling each other stupid. And it's like, oh, you're stupid and you're stupid. And these people, and people closing each other off, where it's like, yeah, I mean, I was in local government briefly, and it's like, these days it's like, oh, I'm a Democrat. I won't even I heard this study recently that the majority of both Democrats and Republicans now would be unhappy if their child married a member of the other party. And it's like, I mean, this isn't really where we were. This isn't where we were 30 years ago. This definitely isn't where we were 50 years ago, where we just simply can't work together. And that, oh, you're the yoga mom in San Francisco, and I'm the farmer in Texas, and we just can't. We literally can't find any common ground to meet each other at. I don't believe there's a person out there that I can't find some common ground to meet them at.
You bet. I the other day I retweeted a lady, and she was a vegan author that wrote vegan cookbooks. I mean, about as diametrically opposed to a rancher from Western Oklahoma as you could get. But she was basically making a philosophical statement that you ended up wherever you were at as a result of your own actions. Yeah. So deal with it. And I agree with her. I'm like, yes. And I even made the comment that, look, we can all still find something to agree upon. And she responded, hey, it's cool. So I don't think we're so far gone that we can't make that connection, but it takes a real effort on both parts. I mean, the best way I could put it is, I can't stand out here and scream, and people can't sit in the city and complain about where there is. I mean, you've got to meet in the middle. And it's honestly absurd with the level of communication technology that we have that we aren't meeting in the middle. There's no reason not to, other than just apathy. And it feels better to be with your crew,
And everyone wants the freedom to define their own thing and to be who they want. Yet everyone wants to criticize everyone else when they exercise their. It's like, oh, the vegan author, is like, I'm vegan and I want the freedom, and you're blah blah blah, and it's like, but you don't. I want the freedom to be this way, but it's like, don't. You better not own a firearm. And like the guy who's like, don't you ever take my guns, blah, 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 is like, you idiot, you don't have the freedom to be a vegan. And it's like, who cares? It's like, if someone wants to be a vegan,
yeah.
Right? I mean,
the guys from South Park have been nailing this for decades. I mean, they've been basically pointing fun at the absurdities of American culture for a long time. And I think for good reason, because it is absurd when you think about it. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, when I'm at home playing with my kids, I don't care what people eat. I really don't. When I'm selling livestock for the purpose of providing for my family, I care about what people eat. But, it's a double-edged sword. You can care and you can want, but to what end? There's too many there's more questions than there are answers in this realm.
Yeah, it's just. I find our society to be a profoundly unpleasant place these days, and it's like it's just too much yelling, too many people pissed off, and just too much
Do you think that dissatisfaction that people are, if something stops to be fun, sometimes people will just stop doing it. So do you think that will lead to even more like shutting down and isolation, like finding more people that think like you because it's more comfortable?
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing that really, so when you spend a lot of time on Twitter, I'm not even on Facebook. I've never been on
I've
Facebook, and
never had a Facebook account either.
I don't like, I like Twitter, but you can tell that it is algorithmically trying to put you in a belief bubble of people, like, that Twitter thinks it gets to define. And Facebook obviously does the same thing too, right? Where it's like it Twitter and Facebook are basically trying to produce the maximum of engagement, right? So you engage with content that you agree with.
Yeah.
And so because it is programmed in order to create maximum engagement to keep you in the app, spending as much time on the app as possible, it just ends up driving you towards, these kind of belief bubbles of people that are just, believe the same things you do. And I really don't think that's serving it. I think it's extremely dangerous that
Well, you're running into 1984 Matrix territory, and here's the thing: is this is where I believe independent content, independent stuff is, because we don't fit a model. People that do things on their own. There is no algorithm. The algorithm is the human. Who, my algorithm is how I grew up and evolved and it became who I am today. It's just like yours is. We're all programmed to think and feel, but we base that programming upon our own experiences. So the individual algorithm eventually, hopefully, will overpower the metadata one.
Well, let's hope. I gotta bounce you, man. But what we can do a regular thing.
I do. I appreciate. We knocked out over 2 hours of just sitting here, and I love that we got so far deep in the weeds. And I really appreciate you taking the time this evening. And I know people that listen to this will thank you as well. I think that they'll have a brand new appreciation for you and your company, and I hope that it's a good one.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me on. I hope to be back in the future. Shoot me a link and I'll retweet it.
You bet. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye now.